Your voice matters, so make it count. It's not just who you want for president, it's also about the issues you care about at the state and local level. So vote on November 3rd.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. My name is Bill Harmer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Westport Library. We're pleased to partner with the League of Women Voters to bring you this afternoon's 4th Congressional District Debate. This year, because of the pandemic, we unfortunately cannot invite you all inside the library to listen to the debate and ask questions of the candidates. Nevertheless, we are pleased to play host and bring the debate to your homes live and virtually, using the library's state-of-the-art technology. Thank you for tuning in. Best of luck to each of our candidates. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Kay Maxwell of the League of Women Voters, who will play hosting this, moderating this event today. Thank you.
And thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. And thank you, audience, for tuning in to this live streamed presentation in these obviously very unique times. I do want to remind everyone, though, that recording of League debates, whether they be in person or taken from a computer screen, may not be used without the League's express written approval. The League will only allow audio-video of this event to be broadcasted in entirety, except by the media reporting on the event. Now, the Leagues of Women Voters of Connecticut, Wilton, Bridgeport area, Darien, Fairfield, Greenwich, New Canaan, Norwalk, Reading, Ridgefield, Stamford, Weston, and Westport, as well as, of course, the Westport Library, are very pleased to be the sponsors of this debate between Democrat Jim Himes and Republican Jonathan Riddle, candidates for the 4th District seat in the House of Representatives. Our purpose is to provide you with an opportunity to hear their views on the issues facing the nation. The mission of the League is to encourage the active and informed participation of citizens in their government. And the most basic participation is voting. And we hope that this debate will help voters in the 4th Congressional District make an informed choice on November 3rd. The format we're using for this afternoon's debate is designed to allow the candidates time to discuss the issues. The only rule is that the total time used by each candidate by the conclusion of the debate be approximately the same. I will be posing the questions. The candidates will not be restricted to 1 or 2 minute responses. Instead, they may spend as little or as much time as they feel is appropriate to discuss each issue. Our goal is to encourage debate. The candidates will alternate being the first to respond to a question. And following the question period, each candidate will make a 2-minute closing statement. Members of the League of Women Voters are serving as timers for the debate, and they will keep the candidates and me informed on time expended. If a serious imbalance in time used occurs during the course of the debate, I'll call it to their attention and see that it's corrected. So it's now my pleasure to introduce the candidates. To my immediate right is Republican Jonathan Riddle, and to his right, Democrat Jim Himes. The position of the candidates on the stage, the order of responding to questions, and the order of their 2-minute closing statements were decided earlier. And so now to the debate. And Jim Himes, you are the first to respond. And the question is, do you support retaining, changing, or repealing the Affordable Care Act? Why or why not? And if you do support change or repeal, what changes would you make, or what would you propose to take its place?
Thank you, Kay, for the question. And let me thank the League of Women Voters and Bill and the magnificent Westport Library for hosting this debate. And thanks to Mr. Riddle, who I just met today. And I hope we have a good conversation on the issues. Kay, thanks for starting that question, because we're at a point in time when the Supreme Court is going to decide the future of the Affordable Care Act. And let me be very, very clear about how I feel about the Affordable Care Act and how I have felt about it for the last 11 years of its existence. I voted for it. And I have defended it relentlessly in the last decade. Not because it's perfect, it's not. It missed a couple of really important opportunities to reduce costs in our healthcare system. But think about this. The Affordable Care Act took 44 million uninsured Americans, 44 million uninsured Americans, and to date has given health insurance to half of them. Those are families, 20 million families who don't worry anymore that if they lose their job and somebody gets sick, it's the end of the family, it's bankruptcy. The Affordable Care Act guaranteed that people with pre-existing conditions, that's somebody with breast cancer, with diabetes, could get health insurance. That was new. And you're gonna hear the president say that he's gonna preserve that because he understands how toxic it is to do away with the Affordable Care Act, which is what he's trying to do right now in court. 50 million Americans with pre-existing conditions would lose their coverage. You know that because if you understand anything about insurance, when somebody says you do away with the individual mandate, the requirement that you buy health insurance. And look, I've talked about this for years. I understand that the mandate is unpopular. Americans don't like to be told what to do and what to buy. Now, by the way, they're told that they have to buy automobile insurance, and if they own a home, they have to buy home insurance. But daggone it, I don't want the government telling me that I have to buy health insurance. The problem with that, there's two problems with that. Number one, if young people who are immortal, we were all immortal 22-year-olds at some point, don't buy health insurance, as they won't. They'll go out and buy a flat screen TV instead. When the 22-year-old gets hit by a bus, that happens. Or when the 22-year-old gets leukemia, that happens. Guess who pays their costs? We do. I do, Mr. Riddle does, all of you do. The other problem, of course, if you understand anything about the insurance industry, I've been paying car insurance now for 38 years. I've never had an accident with a major claim. I don't mind that because I like the peace of mind. And I understand that there are people out there who do use their car insurance a lot. The only way an insurance company can offer insurance to people with pre-existing conditions, folks that have survived cancer, folks with diabetes, is if they have people like me in the auto world paying in. So if somebody says they oppose the individual mandate, but they're gonna preserve pre-existing conditions, they're not telling you the truth. I could go on. The Affordable Care Act provided coverage to people under the age of 26, which is a pretty sensitive age, particularly right now. And by the way, here's why I would never support the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. Most Americans get their insurance from their employer. In the last 8 months, 20 million Americans have stopped having an employer. Where do they go? Well, they go to the exchanges that were set up by the Affordable Care Act for peace of mind. So one of the most toxic things that we've seen in this last decade is people on the other side of the aisle saying it was a failure and I'm going to repeal it and I'm going to propose another plan. You haven't heard another plan from Donald Trump, from anybody, because there is no other plan. Now, it's not perfect. We need to lower costs, absolutely. The whole system is too expensive. That's why the right answer is to build on the successes of the Affordable Care Act and make sure that people have access, high quality, at a reasonable price.
Mr. Riddle, your turn.
My opponent, Jim Himes, makes some pretty good points about the healthcare system and the ACA. It does have some pretty good points, but by and large, it is a massive failure that has not provided the proper insurance to millions of Americans. You know, the lies that were told about it, you like your doctor, you can keep them. That wasn't true. You like your plan, you can keep it. That wasn't true. Your premiums will be cut when in actuality, they went up by $2,500 instead of going down by $2,500. The plan that was set up in the exchanges eliminated competition and created a stifling environment where places like Connecticut, who set up state exchanges, only had a single insurer. Now, when you only have that and a monopoly on this, you control the premiums. What we need to do is build, like Mr. Himes said, on the ACA successes. Sure, take some good things from there, but completely replace it. And while we're coming up with this plan that will bring about competition, especially between cross-state competition, that will drive prices and premiums down, drive superior coverage, as well as creating transparency, which the healthcare industry and frankly Congress hasn't addressed. There is no transparency in healthcare. If I go right now to the hospital with a broken arm and say, I'd like to pay for cash for a cast and getting x-rays, they're gonna look at me like I have 10 heads and they're not gonna know what to say. We'll send you a bill. We don't know how much it's gonna cost. That is unacceptable as un-American, and we need to change that. So when I'm in Congress, I'm going to bring a bill that's going to be competitive, that's going to bring transparency, and that's going to be protecting pre-existing conditions. Now, don't let them make you fearful that Republicans want to take away that protection, because that is not true. We want to protect pre-existing conditions, and that is essential to the healthcare system.
Anything else on that question?
Well, I know the Republicans want to protect the Affordable Care Act's guarantee of insurance for people with pre-existing conditions, but you need to ask yourself right now, have you ever heard them say how? I'd love to give everybody a unicorn, but you probably ought to ask me how. They don't have a plan for how. For 11 years, and I actually appreciate Mr. Riddle's statement. He doesn't say he wants to repeal it. For 11 years now, they've told you they're getting rid of it. By the way, in a couple of weeks, they're going to have their opportunity in the Supreme Court to get rid of it. Stand by. Stand by. Now, Mr. Riddle said that the Affordable Care Act actually reduced competition by creating a public exchange, and that there was only one insurer here in the state of Connecticut. That's not true. There are 2 or 3, sometimes 4 insurers in the state of Connecticut. In fact, the Affordable Care Act, by providing a public option in states that chose to do so, created more competition. But he's not wrong about competition. But don't ever believe that healthcare is always going to be about the market. If we're going to guarantee basic levels of healthcare to everybody, we're not going to do what we do within education, right? Very wealthy families get to send their kids to fancy schools, fancy private schools. Less wealthy people don't. Automobiles. Wealthy people get to drive luxury automobiles. People who are not, don't. This country is better than saying the market will determine our health care. That if you're wealthy, you'll get blue ribbon care for your daughter with leukemia, but if you're not, you're going to get the Datsun of care for your daughter with leukemia. So there is a role for competition, but it is in the insurance industry, it is in the pharmaceutical industry, and this country needs to guarantee that if you're in this country, you will have access to health care.
Anything else?
You know, Mr. Himes, you bring up education, automobiles, wealth. You're a man who's worth approximately $5 million or a little bit more. You drive a Tesla and you live in Coscob. You know, you brought up education in wealthy areas. Absolutely, which is why we need school choice. That is imperative. It is a fundamental failure of our government here in Connecticut. So there's many things. Now, I know a thing or two about having to struggle pay bills. I live in South Norwalk on Sheridan Street. It's not the nicest area, but I do know what it means to have to go paycheck to paycheck. I do know what it means to have to, make decisions for your family and whether or not you're going to be able to put food on the table. Okay, I've lived through that. Now, with the healthcare, I completely agree. We do need to make sure that people are covered, but we need to do it the right way. And we need to allow free markets to drive competition and create that area and drive the prices down, okay? So we need to bring a new plan that will deliver that free market enterprise.
Ready for the next question?
Well, we were off to such a good start. And then Mr. Riddle had to make it about me and tell you that I'm a wealthy guy and then what kind of car I drive. I'll tell you this, Mr. Riddle. I've been a lot luckier than some, less lucky than others. I grew up in a single working mom household. When I finished school, I had a bank balance of $0. I worked really, really hard for some success. But I also recognize something that your party won't recognize, which is that my success was, partly about my hard work, but it was a lot about the support of other people. And it was about not having to worry about having access to health care. My success, and as much as it was success, and there's plenty of people more successful than I do, was partly my hard work, but it was a society that valued me. In a public school, I got to go to public school. And from a public school, a career in public school, I got to go to Harvard. I owe the people who funded that public school an incalculable debt. And that's why I'm up here telling everybody that every American, regardless of whether they're born in Westport or Bridgeport, deserves a good public school and guaranteed access to health care and a reasonable shot at the education that will allow them to live the life that we have lived.
All right, since we veered a little bit off of healthcare, let's go to the next question. And Mr. Riddle, you're the first to respond. More is needed to support individuals and businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic that's been devastating to our health and economy. What type of stimulus package aid would you fight for in the coming months?
Well, frankly speaking, Congress should have already acted on this. We should have already had a bill where our small businesses and individuals are suffering through this pandemic through government-enforced lockdowns. It's unfathomable that Congress is dragging its feet on a couple of dollars where they cannot agree with what to do here. You have Nancy Pelosi's bill, $3.2 trillion, that frankly wants to save bankrupt states like California, New York, Illinois, and Connecticut even. You know, they're making the coronavirus the issue of the fiscal irresponsibility of these states. And I wouldn't stand for that if I was in Congress either. However, we need to have Congress bring a bill immediately to help these individuals who aren't working, especially the disabled who have lost their jobs and have not been able to get any job during this pandemic. So I was in Trumbull Gardens, and I will be in Trumbull Gardens in Bridgeport on Tuesday, delivering food to the needy. And I had many conversations, especially at Wade's Dairy this past Saturday in Bridgeport, where individuals are so thankful for the incredible work that individuals like Harry Bell, who runs a Color of Positive Thought organization, is doing incredible work in his community and delivering day after day. And these people are hurting, and I see it with my own two eyes. And it's unconscionable that Congress is dragging its feet, not bringing the stimulus that is so sorely needed by individuals whose businesses have been shut down and individuals who cannot work during this pandemic.
Mr. Hines?
So the question of what I would do to try to address the tragedy of the pandemic is pretty easy to answer, because in March of 2020, I voted for the bipartisan bicameral CARES Act. The CARES Act was $2.2 trillion in spending at a time when the Congress is pretty polarized. It was a remarkable achievement. Created the Paycheck Protection Program, which was a series of forgivable loans that saved thousands and thousands of jobs in the state of Connecticut and around the country. It sent $1,200 checks to most Americans. And of course, it reformed and provided a real cushion for people who were unemployed with a reformed and massively expanded unemployment insurance program. I'm very proud of that. That was a good bill. It wasn't perfect, but it was a good bill. What else did I do? In May of 2020, the House of Representatives passed the HEROES Act. The HEROES Act had even more funding for all of the issues that we face, including research for vaccines. And yes, it had state and local funds. And Mr. Riddle just told you that that's about saving bankrupt states. It's not. That is actually about paying our police officers, our firefighters, our nurses, and our teachers. State revenues are massively down because we're watching the worst recession since the Great Depression. And people can't pay their property taxes. They can't buy and therefore pay sales taxes. And as a result, 1 million in this country, 1 million firefighters, police officers, teachers, and nurses who work for municipalities and for states have been fired. In this moment, first responders and nurses have been fired because states are in such dire need. So it's not about bankruptcy. It's about paying for the people who risk their lives every single day during the coronavirus crisis to keep us safe. The HEROES Act passed in May of 2020. Mitch McConnell said we're going to take a break in May. He still hasn't passed a bill in the Senate. So Mr. Riddle says it's the Congress. We've passed 3 bills. 2 weeks ago on Friday, we passed a $2 trillion bill. So we passed CARES, we passed HEROES. We passed a bill 2 weeks ago that was $2.2 trillion in size, the Democratic House. The president, in contrast, a week ago, you can look at his Twitter feed, in a 48-hour period said, I'm stopping this whole effort, we're shutting it down. 2 days later, he said, let's go big. That's a hard guy to negotiate with, even if he did write The Art of the Deal. Mitch McConnell can't pass anything. So it is a tragedy, but it isn't about the Congress. It's about the failure of the president and of Mitch McConnell, 2 Republicans, to actually appreciate the pain and the tragedy that the American people are feeling right now.
Anything else, Mr. Riddle? Okay. All right, then the next question, and Mr. Himes, you are first to respond. It seems that very little has been done in the last 4 years to prevent foreign adversaries from interfering in our elections and spreading misinformation online. What suggestions do you have to put an end to this nationally?
I'm sorry, is that me?
Yes,
Oh.
sorry.
So I would take issue with the notion that very little has been done. I sit on the Intelligence Committee, and I've spent the last 3 years watching the Department of Homeland Security, the National Security Agency, the FBI, our national security apparatus learn from what happened in 2016. And it's not just about those guys who, behind closed doors, watch the activities of the Russians and others. It's about making sure that here in the state of Connecticut, our election authorities have the resources that they need to make sure that they're secure. And in fact, the federal government has sent very substantial funds out to the states, $5 million to the state of Connecticut, that has been put to work in communities like Westport to make sure that the software is patched, to make sure that the equipment works well. As a consequence, I'm a lot more confident in 2020 that our election will be secure from the kind of cyber tampering that we saw in 2016. What continues to worry me is that in this very polarized time, we are, as citizens, too subject to attempts to manipulate us. We go on Facebook or we go on Twitter, and when something fires us up, we forward it without even thinking about whether it's true or not. And that really troubles me. And to be fair, this is a syndrome on both sides. The President of the United States has made a career, or at least in the last 3 years, about promoting lies, dangerous theories supported by people like QAnon. But we're all subject to the temptation to forward that thing that makes us feel good. The reality is we're American citizens. That's a hell of a title. I don't want to, in history, I would not have wanted to be anything other than an American citizen. I wouldn't want to be a citizen of Rome or of Athens. We're American citizens, and that's not free. That comes with a duty to be a good citizen, to be critical of the information that we see, and to really think about whether the information that we're passing on is really what we believe, if it's good for the Republic, or maybe it's somebody trying to manipulate us. So I actually think we have work to do with the platforms. It's a really thorny problem. The government can't censor people's ideas. I'm not sure I want Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey of Twitter censoring information either. So it's a really thorny problem. But I think the solution is really that we begin to take our role, the privilege of being American citizens, seriously enough to be thoughtful about how we engage politically and not pass on the kind of misinformation that Vladimir Putin wants to use to put each of us at each other's throats.
Mr. Riddle?
Yeah, I'm glad for that question. Thank you. For the past 4 years, my opponent here, Jim Himes, has been peddling a Russian collusion story, which we now know is false. And in actuality, the facts have come to light that it was a Clinton made-up story and put on the Trump campaign. There was no collusion with the Trump campaign in Russia. And I'm glad you mentioned Jack Dorsey and Zuckerberg, because Section 230 should be repealed. Facebook, Google, and Twitter should have their exemptions removed. Because like we've seen this week and what has transpired over the last 4 years of censorship within Facebook, Google, and Twitter and other big tech industries is appalling, and it's unacceptable. You have a New York Post article, the 4th largest publication in America, being censored and taken down, and for Twitter to shut down its entire operation for a day so that information wasn't spread. This is election interference, and it's unacceptable. And yes, there's foreign adversaries who spread misinformation and disinformation, and it's the most dangerous thing that we face today on the internet. It is unacceptable having these things. And I agree with Mr. Himes. In Connecticut here, we have very secure elections. We use paper ballots at our polls, and I have complete faith in our absentee ballot processing. Where I'm fearful of election security is massive mail-in ballots that some states are putting through. So we need to do more there, and we certainly need to secure our online and hold accountable Facebook, Google, and Twitter and other big tech companies who want to censor information and the free flow of information.
All right, next question, and Mr. Riddle, you're first to respond. Most everyone agrees that our current immigration system is in need of repair. What would you propose by way of any reforms?
You know, that's a great question and something that's not talked about enough in today's world. Our immigration system is extremely broken. It takes far too long to become a citizen or enter our country for that matter. But let me make one thing very clear. Pre-coronavirus, the United States is one of the most benevolent and welcoming countries in the entire world. On average, we let in about 1 million legal immigrants. Now, we have legal ports of entries, and our southern border is porous, and we need to secure that. And through building a wall, which my opponent will say walls are a stupid idea and don't work, I point to Hungary, where there was a mass influx of refugees, and Hungary did not want them. They put up a wall, it went down 99%. Walls do work, Mr. Himes. And you know, frankly, you look at the drugs that are coming into this country from the southern border, that has gone down. And a wall also deters individuals fleeing violence, which my heart goes out to them, but it deters them from taking a perilous journey through a dangerous desert, through mountainous terrain, through the fear of drug smugglers taking them and putting them into the sex trafficking trade. That's what a wall helps stop. And my heart goes out to those individuals, children, women that are involved and get taken into that sex trafficking world. So We need to secure our borders. We need to fix our immigration system and make it work for us. And for DACA, we need to protect those individuals as well as give them a pathway to citizenship, but not cutting the line, for them to find a way to give them citizenship. And the immigrants that are here that are undocumented also provide a pathway to documented status and eventually, hopefully, assimilating to our society and becoming U.S. citizens. As Mr. Himes pointed out, there's nothing greater than being a U.S. citizen. I couldn't be more proud of that.
Mr. Himes?
Immigration is a wonky topic. We have a very active discussion about who should be allowed to immigrate in. Should it be highly educated and trained people? Should it be people who bring businesses in? Should it be people who are, as the Statue of Liberty would suggest, dispossessed and the refuse of the rest of the world? That's actually a very fair conversation. And back in the old days, before Donald Trump, we actually did have a pretty good conversation. 2015, the United States Senate passed a comprehensive immigration bill that had 3 components, and it was really smart. And by the way, it passed with 2/3 of the Senate. Very little passes with 2/3 of the Senate. It had a significant amount of money for border security. That is important. Mr. Riddle's right about one thing. A wall is a really stupid idea, and it doesn't work. And I'll come back to that. But the Senate bill had border security money, smart border security money. Hungary does not have 8,000 miles of open border. Hungary is a small country in Central Europe. The bill in the Senate had a path to citizenship, a really rigorous path to citizenship for the then 12 million people who were in this country without documentation. And it had a provision that actually dealt with the heart of the problem. I'll tell you why a wall doesn't work. It's not my phrase, but if you're in Guatemala or if you're in Mexico and you can make $5 a day, 20 miles south, or $5 or $10 an hour, 20 miles to the north, there's no wall that's holding you back. Somebody once said that if you build a 50-foot wall, the next day there's a 55-foot ladder against it. So the Senate bill actually cracked down on the source of people's desire to be here. Contractors and restaurants and cleaning services and farmers who knowingly hire undocumented people. That is the solution. A wall is not entirely a stupid idea. In densely packed urban areas, walls make sense. But along our 3,000-mile southern border, there are very few densely packed urban areas. Mr. Riddle said, we are a moral and humane country. We were a moral and humane country on the issue of immigration. I don't speak in passionate moral terms about policy very much. It's not kind of who I am. But a couple years ago, I went to Brownsville, Texas, and I toured a detention facility. And I saw a lot of Latin Americans, and I grew up in Latin America, who were being held in conditions of maximum security. And what really broke my heart was that mothers were being taken away from their children. Maximum security environment. I talked to a woman, I was the only person on the trip who spoke Spanish. I talked to a woman who couldn't get words out because her 2 daughters had been removed from her company. She didn't know where they were. We were a moral and humane country. This president changed that. He separated families in a profoundly un-American act. And we know why he did it now, because Stephen Miller's words are out there. He did it to scare people. So this country tore babies from their mother's arms because of the president's xenophobia and crippled moral sensibility.
If
Go
I
ahead
could,
again.
it is very sad that what you just mentioned, but that was an Obama-era policy.
Baloney.
The zero-tolerance policy, as John Homan testified in front of Congress many times, was an Obama-era policy. And the separation and the facilities set up were under Obama. That was not something new from this president. And yes, it is tragic, but we are a country of laws. And unfortunately, when you have a zero-tolerance policy, it's a criminal law. Now, if I have a child in my car and I get pulled over for DUI, I get separated from that child. I broke the law. I go to jail. That child goes to DHS. Okay. So, yes, it is tragic, but we need to come up with changes to our system so that it's not tragic. We need to fix our immigration problem so that we want people here. We are a country built on immigration, and it's important that they do it the right way. We have ports of entry for a reason. We are a nation of laws and borders, and they need to be respected.
It doesn't surprise me, Mr. Riddle, that you would rise to the defense of a president that you called, and let me read your quote here, Trump will be regarded as one of the best presidents we've ever had. That's my opponent talking about the current president. So it doesn't surprise me that you would rise to the defense of Donald Trump on this issue, but I'm not going to let you mislead my constituents. Under the Obama administration, there were a lot of deportations and there were detentions. Every detention was charged as a civil offense. Why is that important? Because if an individual is charged with a civil offense, their children can stay with them, and did stay with them. The Trump administration, as you pointed out, chose to make it a criminal offense. Somebody charged with a crime cannot stay in the custody of their children. That's why in Brownsville, I saw 6, 7, 8-year-old girls under metallic blankets crying because they were in a strange new world without their parents. That's why, not because of Barack Obama.
Anything else, Mr. Riddle?
I do, yes.
Yes, go
My only
ahead.
question is that the laws are made by legislators. If you were so touched and so hurt by this, you've had 12 years in Congress to fix this issue, to bring about true immigration reform. I can't understand for the last 12 years, what have you been doing in Congress and not fixing this issue? Why is it year after year you talk about it, but there's nothing ever done in Congress? That needs to change. And frankly speaking, this is why we need term limits. We have individuals in office, like Mr. Himes, who's been there for 12 years, like Mitch McConnell, who's been there for over 30 years, like Nancy Pelosi, who's been there for 35 years, and you have Joe Biden, who is in office for over 47 years. This is unacceptable. It's the same recycled ideas that don't go anywhere. And this is exactly why we need term limits, so we get fresh ideas in there and things of quality of life changes and changes to our structure and our laws and our immigration system can finally get done.
So let me answer the question about why we haven't done anything in 12 years. First of all, that's not accurate. In my first term, the president protected the dreamers and gave them the security to know that they would not be deported. These are the young people who know no other country but the United States. In my first term, when we had the majority in the White House, that's what we did. For 8 years afterwards, I was in the minority. When I was in the minority, a Senate bill that I described to you that I would have voted for every single day of the week, John Boehner, Speaker of the House, would not bring it to the floor. That's why we haven't made much progress. And the law is and can be executed and interpreted by the President of the United States. That's what he does. He chose to change, without the blessings of Congress, a civil offense to a criminal offense, which led to children being taken away from their parents.
Next question?
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Himes, your turn to be first. What positions have you taken or would you take to promote bipartisan cooperation in the House of Representatives?
That's a big and broad and important question, especially at this polarized time. All I can do is give you a bunch of examples where I have been more than willing to break with my party or important constituents within my party. Most notably, when I was in my second term, I voted against every budget on the floor in favor of something that some folks will recall called the Simpson-Bowles budget. It's a terrible budget because it actually fixed the deficit situation through a lot of painful measures. It's not the kind of thing that somebody who's in the business of asking for votes usually does. It was a very painful but fair bill. 38 members of a 435-person body voted for it. I was one of them. I'm very proud of that. USA Today called us the Brave 38 because we were the only 38 members in that body who were serious about it. I've been hearing about it since, by the way, from both the left and the right, but it was a fair and balanced plan. I told the next president of the United States, Joe Biden, in the Situation Room in the White House, that I would not support his and President Obama's desire to go to war in Syria. The president in 2014 wanted to send missiles into Syria because Bashar al-Assad had just gassed his own people in a suburb of Damascus. And there I am in the Situation Room hearing from the Secretary of State and the Vice President. I said, no, Mr. Vice President, I'm not going to ratify the starting of another American war in the Middle East. Last example I'll give you, Kay, probably no issue tears my party up quite so much as trade. Trade has been pretty hard on the American people, some American people, but trade is important to this district. And when the opportunity came to advance the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I came under extreme pressure to vote no, as most of my colleagues, the overwhelming majority did. In fact, the head of the AFL-CIO, big American union, flew down to my office that morning. She's a friend, but she flew down to my office that morning to say I'd better vote no, and I voted yes because it's important to my district. So I have absolutely no problem on the big stuff or on the little stuff if I think it's important. Mr. Riddle will quote statistics that include motions to recommit and or orders to move the previous question and rule votes. But when it matters, I think of one thing and one thing only, which is what the interests of the people of Connecticut's 4th District are, and I vote accordingly.
Mr. Riddle?
Yeah, I think as far as Congress goes with bipartisanship, we've become extremely partisan, not only in Congress, but in a society. And it's become unacceptable and pervasive. So we really need someone who is not tied to a party like myself. And, he would like to, my opponent, Jim Himes, would like to tie me to the Republican Party. But the fact of the matter is I've been an unaffiliated voter my entire voting career up until I decided to run for Congress, which unfortunately, due to our political system, you need to choose a party, and no independent in Connecticut has ever won this seat. So with that being said, it's going to take someone who has a mind of compromise and the ability to be persuasive, as well as be a business development, a fiduciary responsibility for Connecticut. And that's me. I've been a fiduciary financial advisor for my entire career, the last 10 years. And what that means is a legal, moral, and ethical responsibility to take care of your client. Now, in this case, my client would be the people of Fairfield County. And I would carry their best interests at heart, regardless of how it afflicted the Republican Party or disagreed with certain policies that they wanted to pass. And I'm not going to be some party stooge that just goes along with whatever my party leader says. So to highlight bipartisanship, it's someone who can reach across the aisle. It's someone who can have conversations and really dive deep into the issues to get things done for the American people, which frankly, congressmen on both sides have failed to do. And yes, Republicans are guilty of it just like Democrats are. And that needs to stop. We need to bring compromise back. We need to bring cordial conversations back. And I'm the man to do it, and I can do it. And I know how to have those conversations.
Next question, and Mr. Riddle, your turn to be first. What measures would you support to address this country's transportation and infrastructure issues?
So that's a great question, especially for Connecticut. If you look at our train system, if you look at our highway system here in Connecticut, it is falling apart. I mentioned this morning on a Zoom call that I've replaced 12 tires in the past 3 years for my car, and that's due to potholes. Now, what has transpired in Connecticut and what's not being done is the repair of our bridges, the repair of our roads, and the fixing our transportation, public transportation issues on the train. Now, I live in South Norwalk, like I mentioned, and I used to work in New York City. That train is supposed to be 62 minutes. Routinely, I was on that train for 75 minutes, 80 minutes, sometimes upwards of 90 minutes. That is unacceptable when we, not too long ago, bought some new trains, but nobody ever thought to upgrade those tracks, to put in a high-speed rail system. We should be having a conversation about putting in a rail system from Boston to Washington, D.C., similar to what they've done in Italy or China or Japan, where we've fallen tremendously behind on our infrastructure system. It is crumbling, and it's high time that the federal government steps up, along with the state, and revamps our infrastructure system here in Connecticut.
Mr. Himes?
Well, in the spirit of bipartisanship, for the first time this evening, I agree with everything Mr. Riddle just said, and this has been a huge priority for me. One of the things about an incumbent is that you have a record, and I'm pretty proud of my record of having brought in $150 million to rebuild the Walk Bridge here, not here in Connecticut, but just down the road in Norwalk. That is probably one of the most important transportation arteries in the country, and prior to its beginning to be rebuilt, it was, of course, practically Civil War era technology. I brought in federal funds to help develop Steel Point, which is an important element of economic development in Bridgeport, $70 million to rebuild the Merritt Parkway up around Fairfield, where we don't sit in quite the traffic that we used to. I have an extensive record of bringing in the assets and the resources that we need to do it, but in all candor, it hasn't been enough. And one of the great tragedies of President Trump's term It's no secret that I'm not a fan, but had the president really done what he said he was going to do, which is make a major $2 trillion investment in our national infrastructure, I would have camped out in the White House and sang his praises. I thought this man counts himself a builder. You know, he can put his name on stuff. That'd be great. I'm sure that would make him happy. And maybe we get the kind of investment in our infrastructure that we deserve and that we need. Sadly, that never happened. So that's at the top of my priority list. Should the vice president be reelected or elected and I reelected.
Anything else? Okay, Mr. Himes, your turn to answer this one. What, in your view, is the most pressing foreign policy issue facing the U.S. today?
It's a great question. The most pressing foreign policy issue facing us today and tomorrow and the next day is going to be how we negotiate our relationship with China. There's a lot of them, and I don't want to do them short shrift. Instability in the Middle East, rebuilding our relationship with NATO is pretty important. Rebuilding our reputation around the world is important. But the single most, if you press me for one, it will be understanding that our relationship with China, if it is to be successful, has to be very, very carefully managed. Statesmanship is the art of finding common ground where you have it. Commerce, the trade between the United States and China makes both of our economies strong. And those areas in which we disagree, the treatment of the Uyghurs in concentration camps in Western China, their aggressive activities in the South China Sea where they're swapping paint with the United States Navy on a fairly regular basis, their stealing of our IP. We can't think of them as an enemy or as a friend. We have to think of them as an inevitable partner. And we're going to stand strong on those issues of values. You don't get to put an ethnic minority into concentration camps. You don't get to abuse the Tibetans. We're going to encourage them over time to have a more responsive, more accountable government. But they hold a lot of our national debt, the debt that Mr. Riddle talked about earlier. They are a critical trade partner. So we are going to build on those areas of common cause, even as we stand against some of their bad behavior around the world. That's going to be very challenging.
Mr. Riddle?
I agree. China is our biggest threat that we face today. And, you know, one thing that Mr. Himes didn't mention is the artificial island building that is occurring in the South China Sea with their military bases. They are taking over shipping lanes and trying to extend their national borders to natural resources that are going to create a huge problem in the South China Sea. And I agree, the Tibet issue, along with India, that is the skirmishes that recently occurred over the last month, is unacceptable behavior by the Chinese. And we need to hold them accountable. And finally, that we have, you talk about trade, finally we have a president who's willing to go toe-to-toe with China and hold them accountable and make them pay after they've taken advantage of us for so long. We now have ability to go after China and really create proper trade agreements that frankly were one-sided to begin with. And so, you know, in closing that argument, China is our biggest threat and we need to deal with them appropriately. And we're going to do that.
Anything else? All right, next question. Mr. Riddle, you're first to respond. What measures, excuse me, what measures, if any, would you support to regulate firearms in order to reduce the level of gun violence in the United States?
This is a great question. And, you know, to be honest, what is transpiring in our inner cities is atrocious. It's sad. And the focus is not there. You look at a city like Chicago or Bridgeport, where 90% of the gun violence issues are gang related or socially, economically related. And it's appalling. Additionally, what we're not talking about is mental health and societal issues. You look at 26 out of the last 27 mass shootings. These individuals were on psychological drugs. And the missed issues between local police or teachers or parents of these kids suffering and their mental health issues. While as a country, we're shutting down mental health institutions, these individuals such as, you know, and Adam Lanza, how many times did they know that he was not an individual fit for walking our streets? And it was a failure of, thankfully we have Ethan's Law of safe gun storage. He was able to access that firearm that was unlocked, and that should have never happened. And unfortunately, our most precious asset, our children, suffered because of that. So that's something that we need to address immensely in our country, is the mental health aspect. Now, in terms of firearms, Mr. Himes will cite statistics that we have around 36,000 gun deaths in this country. Now, 2/3 of that, he'll say, is suicides. And he's correct. However, we're the only country in the entire world that classifies a suicide by gun as a gun death rather than just a suicide. That is a broader mental health and societal issue that we need to address. Guns are not the problem. If you really want to go down into those statistics, that leaves about 11,000, and 90% of that is gang violence. About 300 to 500 of them are accidental discharges, whether it's someone handling a firearm at home or at a gun range. Now, guns are cherished by over 300 million people. We have approximately 500 million guns in this country. I myself am a gun owner. I'm a responsible gun owner, and I stored my guns responsibly. You know, it's gun control laws that leave the law-abiding citizen without something to defend themselves. And you have the strictest gun control cities, Chicago, New York City, that have the highest gun violence. Why is that? It's a failure of policing. It's a failure of proactive policing. And here in Connecticut, we just passed a Police Accountability Act that restricted officers' ability to search a car, that stripped them of their qualified immunity, that frankly speaking makes communities less safe. The proactive policing that I'm talking about, if someone is acting suspicious in a car, that's probable cause to search that vehicle. And maybe it stops a school shooting or drugs to getting to our children. But our communities are less safe because of that bill. And we need to be allocating more funding towards police and more training for them and hiring more officers. Not driving our veteran officers to retire because we want to strip them of qualified immunity and the things that make our community safe. We need to do better there, and we need to have more proactive policing with the laws that are already on the books. We have strong enough gun laws in this country. They're just not being enforced properly, and we need to do that.
Mr. Himes?
Well, I was very saddened to hear. I was agreeing with much of what Mr. Riddle said until he said that guns are not the problem and the problem is enforcement. That's just not true. And I've spent an awful lot of time on this issue. I was in office when those children were murdered in Sandy Hook, so there's no way that any elected official in the state of Connecticut is ever going to do anything but pay an awful lot of attention to this issue. Like a lot of my Republican friends, Mr. Riddle likes talking about Chicago as though it's the Chicago police's fault. It's funny because they stand up for the police in other areas apparently, but they blame the police for that issue. The problem in Chicago is that, yeah, they have strong gun laws, but Indiana is 45 minutes away. The problem in Connecticut is not that we don't have strong gun laws, it's that you can buy guns in Virginia in an unregulated way and be here in 3 hours. So it's not about enforcement, it's about consistent and uniform laws created at the federal level. Now, I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment. I think law-abiding gun owners should have the guns that are reasonable for them to have. That gets me in trouble with my wife sometime, but that's what I believe. I'm sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution, including the Second Amendment. So what I support are those things that have made the country safer all over the country and frankly all over the world. Guns are the problem. We don't have more violent movies than Japan. We don't have any more mental illness than Germany. What we have is a society that is awash in guns. So what I would support and will support is universal background check. No matter who you are, no matter where you buy a gun, you're getting a background check. I support limits on some kind of weapons. No civilian who's hunting or protecting themselves needs a fully automatic or even a semi-automatic assault rifle. I agree that we have to focus on safe storage, but let's really do it. Republicans nowhere will countenance the notion that we should have standards for how guns are stored in private homes. That's why our suicide rate is what it is. I don't quite understand Mr. Riddle's point about classification. Kill yourself with a gun, try to kill yourself with a gun, you're much more likely to be successful than if you don't have a gun. So let's just be very clear. Universal background check, restrictions on the owning of assault rifles by civilians, limits on the number of rounds you can put in it. These things will dramatically, not eliminate, but dramatically reduce the carnage in our streets.
You know, my opponent talks about fully automatic weapons. Now, maybe you're just a little uneducated on the topic here, but in order to get a fully automatic weapon, you need to have a Class 3 license. Class 3 license is extremely hard to get by. It's frankly only given to military or police officers. And unless you have an extreme amount of wealth, it's very difficult to get. So we don't have fully automatic weapons on our streets legally. And I agree with him. Background checks are important. And yes, I agree with closing the loophole in our gun shows as well as private sale transactions. I believe that every single gun sale should go through a federal firearms dealer with a background check, so we know that criminals aren't buying these guns. And that's very important. You know, straw purchase laws that have been passed in order to prevent things like Mr. Himes highlights. Indiana is just 45 minutes from Chicago. However, we passed straw purchasing laws where individuals who were purchasing large amounts of guns and then transporting them to these high gun control cities to sell them, they get flagged, and it's worked. Now, is there things that fall through the cracks? Absolutely. We need to strengthen the federal, state, and local cooperation with these background checks and ensure that the right people are buying these law-abiding citizens. Okay. Now, semi-automatic weapons, well, every gun is semi-automatic, so I guess you want to ban all guns, which is true to the Democrat Party. They do not want you to be able to protect yourself. The Second Amendment is there to protect us against a tyrannical government, to protect us when the police in 2020 showcase this, when cities are burning and your business is under fire and your wife is getting beaten. You should have a means to protect yourself. When the criminals have guns, and by the way, the definition of a criminal is someone who's not going to follow the law. So what laws are we going to pass that criminals will follow? The answer is none. They're going to break them. They're going to find ways to break them. We need to protect our citizens' rights to protect themselves when the police are 4 to 5 minutes away, or in the case of New York City or Portland or Seattle, when those cities were burning and people called 911 and the operator said, "I'm sorry, we can't get to you. We have too many calls. We don't have enough officers on station." That is absurd. We need to be able to protect our citizens' right to protect themselves.
Next question, Mr. Himes, you're first to respond. And I would just mention, Mr. Riddle, you've used somewhat less time than Mr. Himes. So, all right, the environment. What are your views on how to combat climate change and its effects? Mr. Himes?
So climate change is two things. It is existential to the future of the globe. President of the United States doesn't believe the scientists. I guess that's his right, but it's tremendously damaging to the globe. Said it the other day, scientists don't know what they're talking about. We know what they're talking about because we're seeing 100-year storms every 7 or 8 years here in the state of Connecticut. The state of California is on fire in ways it's never been historically, and temperatures are rising everywhere with implications for our national security, our agriculture, and all sorts of other things. So the first thing we got to do is acknowledge that it's an issue. I was disappointed when the nominee to the Supreme Court didn't have an opinion on this. It's not up for debate anymore. Climate change is real. And the problem with fidabadabbing about whether it's real or not is that we have to lead the global effort to address climate change. Yeah, the Chinese are polluting a lot. The Indians are too. They've got over 1 billion people in their country. We need to lead. So we need to get back in the game and say, this is a serious issue. We acknowledge the science and we're going to lead. How do we do that? There's a lot of ways we do that. A couple ideas, large and small. One of the things you do is you actually employ a market mechanism. Hydrocarbons, if we want to do sort of little economics here, you don't pay for the cost of using it. When you buy a gallon of gasoline, you're not paying for the cleanup costs of that. Economists call that externalities, right? When you burn electricity that comes from photovoltaics or nuclear or from hydro, there aren't those externalities. So if we were to put in place something that has broad support across the aisle, a fully refundable carbon fee, where you actually make carbon cost what it actually costs, now, here's the market mechanism, burning carbon is less competitive relative to solar, wind, biomass, nuclear, and hydro. That's a big thing. It's a hard thing. You got to do it right. You can't take out states that produce a lot of hydrocarbon like Wyoming and West Virginia. You got to be thoughtful about Florida, which makes most of its electricity by burning stuff. That's a big thing. Has a lot of bipartisan support. There's a lot of little things. We got to get back in the game of technology, massive storage batteries, thinking about modular, small and safe nuclear plants. These are the kinds of things, installing the kind of wind, by the way, right here in New England, we're installing an awful lot of wind generation capacity. The reason we do that, the opponents of addressing climate change will tell you that we will crush jobs. We will create massive numbers of jobs. There's more people in this country working on solar panels than there are working in the coal fields. We're at risk of, for the first time in our history, following not leading a technological revolution. We led the IT revolution, we led the telecommunications revolution, you name it. We're going to buy our stuff from China, which is why we need to first embrace that this is real, embrace that it's a problem, and have the courage and the thoughtfulness to actually address the problem.
Mr. Riddle?
I don't disagree with the congressman. Climate change is real. It's been going on for billions of years. The science he talks about, we're basing it off of 150 years of data or 200 years. Take your pick. We're basing the science off of the science lover's idea, where you create a model, you find data that supports that model, you throw away the data that doesn't agree with it, and then you say, trust the experts, rather than the scientific method of there's an idea, a hypothesis, the hypothesis is tested, and so on and so forth until there's results and then conclusion, right? So we cannot sit here and be naive enough to think that man-made climate change is an existential threat, or humans do enough significantly to contribute to the consequences they're projecting based on unrealistic models. Yes, we do contribute, but on an insignificant level. And with the lockdowns, we saw the air over China literally create and clean itself. The waterways in Italy, they cleaned themselves and fish life returned. The earth is magnificent in its being and its creation and its ability to take care of itself. We need to respect that. Now, CO2 is a life-giving element. Greenhouses actually pump CO2 in to make a greener greenhouse. The United States had record number of agricultural production last year. The earth has never been greener. More people are living in a warmer climate rather than in freezing cold. These are things that are never discussed about that. And he's right. Maybe he read my website and said that's a great idea, but we need to start focusing on nuclear power if we want some real, true green energy. It is the cleanest, safest, and greenest energy resource that we can build, and we need to bring our country up to a 21st century. He talks about wind and solar. Nobody talks about the production of these materials are harmful for our environment and are absolutely out of control. You talk about the cobalt, not to mention the human rights violation going on in Africa, mining for these cobalts. Nobody speaks about that. The lithium-ion batteries, when they're used up and they need to be disposed of, are an extreme hazardous environmental disaster. The wind farms, when a blade breaks, because it's such a synthetic material, it sits in a landfill for, we estimate, for about 100 years before it's able to decompose. We can't recycle them properly, and they break frequently, not to mention kill tremendous amounts of birds. So with small modular nuclear reactors, this is going to be an important part of the next generation of energy production in America. And we can do them for cities like Bridgeport, put a small nuclear reactor there and power the whole entire city, lowering the entire cost. And the interim, Congressman Himes mentioned Florida, and they burn stuff. He's right. 50% of their production comes from natural gas. And actually our carbon emissions have decreased immensely over the last 5 years by burning clean natural gas, which we have an abundance of and we're selling around the world. Natural gas is an important aspect of our society that holds Russia and their economy down from selling their natural gas. And that's an important part of our revenue source here in America. Natural gas is a very clean burning fossil fuel. And while we're building these nuclear reactors, Connecticut is already set up to harness the power of natural gas. We just need to implement it. Now, we face some of the highest electricity costs in the country. What Eversource and UI have done, especially as Mr. Himes said, the 100-year storm that hit Westport, and I was shocked to see a tornado in Westport. But what transpired after that is unacceptable. We need to end those monopolies of our power grid with Eversource and UI and bring in a public-private partnership that's going to bring about tremendous change for Connecticut, drive energy costs down, and make a better life here and quality of life in Connecticut.
All right, and I'm sorry, gentlemen, but our time is up and it's time to move to closing statements. So if our timers can clear their watches, they'll hold up signs when you have a minute left, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and to stop. And Mr. Himes, you're first.
Well, thank you, Kay. Thank you to you, the League of Women Voters. Thank you, Mr. Riddle, for a good debate. I'm glad we're closing here because I was a little concerned about how I might address his last answer. that climate change has been going on for 5 billion years, that the world is a magnificent thing and it will clean itself, and that the science is suspect. I should probably just close on that note. But it's way too serious to do that. One of the reasons there are almost 250,000 dead Americans today is because our president has denied the science, the basic science that says that you wear masks and you social distance. And when you do that, you save lives. The president, instead of telling us that this disease was deadly serious, told us it was a hoax, that it would go away by Easter and we'd be packing the churches, and that maybe you should put disinfectant in your veins or sit out in the sun. Not everybody who died of COVID died because of Donald Trump, but a lot of people did. And we know that because we have the worst death statistics in the developed world. We are behind Germany, we are behind France. We have almost 700 dead Americans per million. We're worse than Mexico because the president was dishonest and he didn't look at the science. Restoring this country in 2021 is going to be something that I look forward to doing, because it will be about embracing the science and embracing truth and embracing decency. I have been in office for a while, and in every day that I have been in office, I have thought about my constituents and what is best for them. I've thought about the truth and about science, and I've tried to do that in a decent way, because this district and this country deserve the decency that we haven't seen for 4 years. We're in a bad place today, America. We need to go back to the world of truth and science and a commitment to the people who get left behind by the market economy that we both agree is important. And most importantly, we need to go back to the decency that is at the core of what made this country great. That is why I'm running for re-election.
Thank you. And Mr. Riddle, your 2-minute closing statement.
Thank you, Kay, and thank you, League, as well as the Westport Library. During Jim Himes' 12-year tenure in Congress, Fairfield County has seen an economic collapse, with businesses and people fleeing the state in staggering numbers. We are the only state in the Northeast that has never recovered from the 2008 crisis, and only one of 2 in the nation to show negative GDP growth. Specifically, over the last 4 years, while this collapse has accelerated, Congressman Himes was more focused on overturning an election and promoting a Russian collusion story on MSNBC and CNN, which we now know was false, and Jim Himes outright lied to the American people when he knew there was no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, while in actuality, evidence has come to light that it was invented by the Clinton campaign. Career politicians like Jim Himes would have you believe they are the experts and know all the answers to solve our problems. This is also the reason I'm running for term limits, limiting congressmen to 8 years, 4 terms. Congressman Himes, you have been in office for 12 years, 6 terms. It is time for you to go home. As your next congressman, I will not pretend to know all the answers, but instead work with all the industry experts to develop and usher in a new era for Fairfield County, to include but not limiting to: number 1, the economic development, bringing businesses back and good paying jobs with a renewed focus on Bridgeport, which has been historically left out for the last 50 years. Number 2, a dedicated and comprehensive infrastructure plan to rebuild our roads and public transportation to bring it into the 21st century. Number 3, develop a fully workable healthcare system to replace the ACA that will protect pre-existing conditions, foster free market cross-state competition that will drive prices and premiums down while delivering superior coverage and price transparency. And lastly, eliminate Common Core and establish school choice voucher programs to finally rescue inner city schools from a failed schooling system and protect against school regionalizations. When elected, I will work diligently for you, the people of Fairfield County, not a partisan system, and definitely not a party overstate.
On behalf of the League of Women Voters and the Westport Library, thank you both gentlemen for an interesting debate on some serious issues. We appreciate it. And of course, to the audience out there, remember to vote on November 3rd. That's your last chance. You also, of course, could do absentee ballots this year. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Kay.
Yeah.